Hello Scaredy Cats, it's me, Scaredy Matt. Look, this video is going to be discussing problematic stuff in horror, and not just in the way that we always kind of do, but specifically, it's about that as a concept. So there's going to be a lot of heavy topics. I'm going to be discussing a lot of stuff that might make some people very uncomfortable. Stuff like sexual assault, ableism, racism, transphobia, that kind of thing. And lots of other stuff, I'm sure. I don't even know all of the problems I'm going to discuss. Folks, you know me, I'm not trying to make people uncomfortable or make a video that gets too dark. I'm still going to do a silly one. I'm going to make silly videos for clowns. I'm just saying, if this kind of thing is likely to ruin your day, maybe give this video a skip and go watch my video about wacky music videos from horror movies instead. That one can only make your day better.
You better watch out when you hear that sound. It means that the maniac cop's around. Once upon a time he was a super cop, but the bad guys fight to make him stop.
Okay, this is something that keeps coming up in the comments of every video I make on this channel, or in regards to many, if not most, of the movies I recommend. Matthew, how can you enjoy that movie when it's so problematic? Matt, you wore a Reanimator shirt in this video. Didn't you know that H.P. Lovecraft, the guy who wrote the public domain short story this movie is very, very, very loosely based on, was a terrible racist? Matt, Texas Chainsaw Massacre has classist undertones, and it demonizes the mentally ill. Matt, you just did a full series on the Phantasm movies. You didn't even mention that Jodie says the R slur in Phantasm. Hashtag Scaredy Matt is over party. And I get it. I'm Mr. Sensitive. I'm always doing content warnings and shit. I just did one a second ago. I'm always whining about stuff in media that I view as derogatory or harmful. And here I am liking stuff that has derogatory or harmful stuff in it. What a hypocrite. I get it. But I also think that's a bad way to look at media and how we process it. Friends, everything is problematic. Everything. Nothing is free of sin in this fallen earth. Everyone is going to have their personal limit for what they will and will not tolerate, but if you've convinced yourself that you've purified your media intake and now only enjoy the problem-free stuff, you're probably just ignoring some of the problems. I think if your goal is to not like anything with problematic elements, you're tilting at windmills. It's never going to happen. Now you could take this to a logical extreme and just say, I'm not going to take in any media. But you probably don't want to do that. So you might compromise and just cut out the stuff with the most problematic themes. And that would lead you pretty quick to cutting out the majority of horror. Horror depends heavily on the taboo. And that's bound to intersect with ways that people are marginalized in society. Furthermore, a lot of horror is cheap exploitation cinema that might play up salacious prejudices. Not always, but often enough to make you think twice about it. Like, the virgin always survives because a woman's virginity is a mark of their moral character. The black guy always dies first because studios figure that he's the least marketable to the only demographic they think is worth marketing to, which is white people. Queerness is otherized and associated with evil. Like, for example, the killer is the killer because they dress in women's clothing. The killer is the killer because they're trans, but at the last minute the writer realized, hey, wait a minute, that's actually kind of fucked up. So he put in a pithy caveat about how the killer isn't actually trans, he just wants to become a woman for other, non-trans reasons. The mentally ill are presented as dangerous, whereas in real life, the mentally ill are far more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators. An unspeakable and unknowable evil from deep within the bowels of space has set its sights upon humanity. And what it wants to do, the thing it's going to do, the evil plan it has is race mixing. Hey look, sexual assault, isn't that shocking? Aren't you shocked? You know who can protect you from evil? Why, the powerful institutions that regularly prey on innocent people and children, of course. Hey, you know who's dangerous? Foreigners. Hey, you know who's dangerous? People in your own country. And of course, anti-Babadook prejudice. I could go on. And I think all of those things are worth criticizing. But I don't think that just because something like that is in a movie, that means you should necessarily write it off. Once again, everyone has their own limit for what they're going to tolerate, so by no means am I suggesting you have to just toughen up and accept this stuff. But I don't think it's hypocritical to find things like that distasteful while also enjoying works of art that contain those elements. Furthermore, I think a work of art can have a hateful message, and people who don't support that hateful message can still enjoy that work for other reasons. Even putting aside death of the author for a second, because I'm not going to be talking about how people can just read a positive message into something which may or may not be in there in the text, like who cares? I don't think a work of art can be reduced to the message it sends, because sometimes people like things purely for aesthetic reasons, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily, so long as they're willing to be critical of the problematic elements within the work. Let me take one of the most basic, cut and dry examples of a movie that is horribly problematic. Sleepaway Camp. Spoilers, I guess, for the end of Sleepaway Camp, but you probably already know, and if you don't, you probably shouldn't go in blind, because it gets pretty goddamn transphobic. Like, for real, the things I'm about to discuss in this movie are seriously fucked up. At the end of Sleepaway Camp, it's revealed that Angela, the shy girl at camp, was the killer the whole time. She was driven insane because her mother forced her to become a girl despite being assigned male at birth. And the way that they portray this in the movie, Jesus Christ, is by superimposing the face of the prepubescent actress Felissa Rose onto the body of her sweet adult man, complete with just his whole hog swinging in the air. That is indefensible. That's hateful and undoubtedly harmed many trans people who watched and gave thousands more very shitty ideas about trans people. But at the same time, if I'm being honest with you, I still like Sleepaway Camp. I think it's a fun movie that comes with a huge caveat that it's got a very bigoted ending. I wouldn't ask anyone who this issue affects more than me to simply get over how damaging and hurtful this movie is towards them. Furthermore, I think if anyone actually defended the depiction of trans people in this movie, I would find that contemptible. If we were to total up the good elements and bad elements of Sleepaway Camp, the bad elements would win. Any enjoyment I get from the goofy costumes or fun kills is far, far outweighed by the harm the film's story does. However, I don't think enjoying this movie is an endorsement of its harmful views, but, maybe don't pay to watch it. If you'd like a much, much more in-depth conversation about Sleepaway Camp specifically, then I would recommend this episode of the Dead Meat podcast about transgender representation in horror, which features Joan Ford, a trans woman who obviously can explain the complicated relationship she has with the movie better than I would be able to put into words.
I think they are still important, for better or worse, are still important characters to enter into the conversation. And I also want to say, I feel like if you take the Sleepaway trilogy, as a whole, she is a trans character for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When she's being played by Pamela Springsteen.
Yes. But it's almost like I wish that the Angela from 2 and 3 were the interpretation of the character that caught on.
I would think it's also clear that I think murder is a bad idea. And unlike bigotry, I actually enjoy seeing murders in a horror movie. It's usually what I'm there to see. I sit down to watch a horror movie and I'm like, boy, I hope there's some murders in this one. I hope that the murders are very violent. That'd be neat. Now, this is not a one-to-one analogy, obviously. Very few horror movies take it for granted that murder is cool and good. It's meant to shock you rather than confirm your existing prejudices. Obviously, there are fewer fans of indiscriminate murder than there are transphobes who will have their dangerous attitudes reinforced. But still, some people will find this type of fictional violence equally triggering, particularly people who've experienced or witnessed violent trauma. Some people will draw the line farther back and say, I just can't watch it. And if we're basing our view of what is and is not acceptable art on its capacity to do damage, where do we draw the line? And I'm not going to go down some slippery slope bullshit with you. I think it's plenty reasonable to be mad at or disapprove of movies like Sleepaway Camp. I don't think that leads to some sort of McCarthy-esque witch hunt. But I also don't think it's helpful to divide things into categories of what is and is not okay to like, bearing some very extreme examples. Like, anybody who says they like Mein Kampf for its writing style is probably lying. They probably like it for the Nazi stuff. That's a fairly safe assumption. I think a nuanced take is to be willing to interrogate why we like something. Sometimes those reasons will merit criticism and disapproval. Sometimes you might find that you like something for not great reasons, and you should maybe let that thing go. Sometimes you have to be careful with what you recommend to people and why. So that's why I try to do that. I don't think it's possible to talk about media, particularly horror, without upsetting some people. Horror is kind of for upsetting you. That's the thing people like about it. That doesn't mean, though, that all types of upsetting people are the same, and sometimes you might want to be upset by a very spooky ghost, and instead, the movie that some guy on YouTube told you to watch made you feel dehumanized. The approach that I think is best is to warn people of things which are likely to upset them, particularly when those things are not something they might expect from a brief description. Instead of trying to avoid anything with harmful messaging or problematic elements, to instead give people the information they need to decide what level of harmfulness they feel comfortable being exposed to, while remaining critical of those elements. It's not your responsibility to expose yourself to problematic media, but if you do anyway, which everyone does, that's fine. I do think it's your responsibility to be critical of those elements. So like, if when talking about Sleepaway Camp, you said, well, I don't think the ending's that big a deal, or this movie is alright, but the ending's great, or people are too sensitive, get over it, it's just a little transphobia. I'd look at you sideways. That would make you seem extremely sus. I would probably say, hey bro, that thing you just said, that could use some work. But if you just said you liked the movie, I wouldn't assume you were a transphobe. I know this seems like basic stuff to some of you, but I get messages from people in distress over feeling like they're betraying their values for having problematic faves. But what media you consume has nothing to do with your moral worth. Watching a movie is not activism. That doesn't mean just turn your brain off and passively accept whatever's happening on screen. But if you feel like a hypocrite for liking a movie while also criticizing something about it, don't. That's what you're supposed to do. Okay, now it's the end of the video. I'm gonna give you a minute to cancel me. Done? Good? Alright, great. Now that you've done that, please press the like button and subscribe to me, Matt, who made this video that you just watched here on Scaredy Cats. I put out a new video every Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.